And we want to thank you all first for joining us for the Protecting Children in a New Normal. Hopefully you are hearing sound at this time. If you cannot, well, of course, if they can't hear anything, they won't be able to hear me with these instructions, but hopefully your technology is working properly. If you have any challenges with technology, please just put it in the chat and one of our panelists will assist you. But we'll go ahead and get started. We have about 140 professionals on the line with us this morning. We're super thankful for you joining us. And as you all know, we're sort of still in the middle of this pandemic, but this back to school season is certainly unlike any other that we've experienced thus far in the past. And educators and school personnel are navigating uncharted territory as they interact with children who have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic in various ways. And so some of these interactions may require a professional to make a report of abuse or neglect to the Division of Family and Children's Services or link the family with resource providers. And so whether you're in person or through distance learning, educating in person or through distance learning, you educators, the educators and school personnel are still responsible for protecting children. And we do understand that we have some other youth serving organizations on the line with us today. So we thank you for joining us, and we're definitely excited to share some of this information with you today. And then here's some of the questions that you have and really take a moment to address those, because we are certainly living this out together. So we will address a few different things today. And this webinar is actually a part of a series of webinars developed to address some of those critical questions that have come up since the beginning of this pandemic. And we have professionals from various state agencies that have joined together to carry on these critical conversations as the pandemic really unfolds before us. And while we do not have all of the answers, and I'll go ahead and say that now, we don't have all the answers. But the goal of this webinar and future webinars are to really provide some considerations and resources for protecting children and mandated reporting during this new normal, however that may look in your community. So we definitely wanted to provide this platform for you to continue to ask some of those critical questions, and we could sort of figure them out together and navigate this uncharted territory together. So we'll go ahead and get started today. So this is just an overview agenda of what we will be discussing today. And during this webinar, we will briefly cover some of the critical questions that have been asked. You all had an opportunity during registration to ask some of those questions. And then of course, we'll have some time at the end to go through them as well. We'll describe how the crisis is impacting students, and I'm sure some of you have had sort of a firsthand experience with that while working in the classroom, either physically or through distance learning. We'll also discuss some safety considerations for assessing child safety in virtual environments and what you can do as professionals. Lastly, we'll have experts from the Georgia Department of Education, the Division of Family and Children's Services, Prevent Child Abuse Georgia, and ProSolutions, the Georgia Center for Child Advocacy, and even Children's Healthcare of Atlanta join us sort of for an in-depth conversation around many of the questions that you've asked and how we can continue to join together and ensure the safety of children while this pandemic is ongoing. So we hear you. You have critical questions. You've contacted some of your colleagues to ask these questions. And you want to ensure you're doing everything in your power to ensure or to protect children and ensure their safety. And so what I'm going to do now is invite Cheryl Benefield. She's the Mental Health and Wellbeing Coordinator for the Georgia Department of Education, to share a few words on the concerns that you've been expressing since the pandemic began. So Cheryl, we'll go ahead and invite you to speak to this for us.
Good morning, Nation. Thank you so much for having me. You know, we know that it's been an incredibly stressful time for school personnel and school staff as they have worked through school closures last spring and then worked through this unprecedented restart for this school year. And some of the concerns that we've had coming in around protecting our students and protecting the children in our communities have been centered on the number of referrals. There's been a lot of publicity around the number of referrals to DFACs that have gone down once school closed. And we're aware that schools have had some really specific concerns about how they make those mandated reports, how they know when things are happening with students, and how they can best serve and best protect the children that are in their care, even if it's in a virtual environment. So we really appreciate our partnership, pardon me, our partnerships with everyone on this webinar and our other sister agencies throughout the state to work with you, to work with schools, and to support you as you support the children and the staff in your school.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. So a few of the questions that you all have sort of submitted to us via the registration link, or just questions that we've heard from various professionals throughout the state, are listed here. How do I ensure the safety of a child via distance learning? How can we assist families in rural communities with limited jobs and resources? How is DFACS responding to low reporting numbers? Is my mandated reporting role still the same? And then how can nonprofits and other organizations best support DFACS in the school systems during this time? And we hope to address those questions either through the presentation or through the panel discussion that we have today. So the crisis is undoubtedly having an impact on students, and you all are aware of that through your interactions with students, and we're aware through the various reports or statistics that we've received thus far. And many of us are aware that during times of crisis and economic instability, risk of child abuse and neglect do increase. One research study revealed that during the last recession, rates of abusive head trauma in children increased from 9 to 15 per 100,000 children between the years of 2004 and 2009. And then they actually doubled in children 2 years old and younger. Another study found that for every 1% increase in the 90-day mortgage delinquency rate, there was a 3% increase in the rate of child abuse requiring hospital admission, and a 5% annual increase in the rate of traumatic brain injuries suspected to be caused by child abuse. So we do understand that even in these tough economic times and with the burden of the pandemic sort of increasing the requirements and the restraints on families, there could be some increased parental frustration and other factors that are contributing to the rates of child maltreatment or child abuse increasing. At the beginning of the pandemic, many children were cut off from their primary safety nets, such as schools and youth-serving organizations. The reporting numbers reflected this, as we saw sort of a 50% decrease in reports of suspected abuse and neglect after school ended back in March. And similar decreases in reports happen during the summer months when children are not in school. So we definitely want to make a point of that. And we'll have some experts from the Division of Family and Children's Services speak a little bit more to that and what we can do to sort of explain that to others. We must also keep in mind that as students return to the classroom, some of them may return with heightened levels of anxiety. One study actually in 2020 actually asked parents if they increase their use of physical discipline or yelling during the pandemic. And the study found that 19% of parents said that they are yelling or screaming more, and 15% said that they increase their use of discipline. So this is definitely something that's happening in the homes. And this is not, of course, parent blaming, but just offering some considerations to why our students may be returning to the classroom with some increased anxiety or some struggles paying attention, different things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. So let's expound on why some students may return to the physical classroom or even the virtual environment with heightened anxiety. And we all have something called the stress response, right? And this stress response system can actually be divided up into 3 distinct sort of levels. And of course, they all interact with one another. But sometimes when our stress response is triggered in a way that is not supported or buffered, it can cause some damage. So we'll talk a little bit about each stress response and how our body reacts to each one. So with a positive stress response, it is normal and an essential part of healthy development. And it's characterized by some brief increases in heart rate and mild elevations in hormone levels. An example of an experience that may evoke a positive stress response is the first day of virtual learning with a new teacher and new classmates. And so positive stress response is actually healthy. In fact, we understand that this is a critical part of development. Every child needs to, at some point, go through something similar. With a tolerable stress response, this activates the body's alert systems to a greater degree as a result of some more severe, longer lasting difficulties, such as the loss of a loved one or a natural disaster, or even a frightening injury. Maybe a child falls ill, and then the family are not sure if it's something relating to COVID-19 or another type of illness. And so if the activation of that stress response is time limited and buffered by some relationships with adults who help the child adapt and sort of get over that particular stress response or experience, the brain and the other organs will recover from what might otherwise be some damaging effects. And lastly, we have the toxic stress response. And this can occur when a child experiences some strong frequent and/or prolonged adversities such as physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, some caregiver substance abuse, or exposure to untreated mental illnesses, exposure to violence. And so this happens, toxic stress is dangerous when there is no support or adult support for that child. So it's not buffered by that adult support, love, and attention. And this kind of prolonged activation of the stress response system can disrupt the development of the brain architecture and some of the other systems as well. And it also increases the risk for some stress-related diseases and cognitive impairment well into adulthood. So think about this within the educational context. If a child is constantly exposed to toxic stress, will they be able to pay attention and retain information in your classrooms? So if you could type into the chat what behaviors a child that is experiencing some toxic stress may exhibit in your classroom. So if you could just type in a few examples of different behaviors that a child who may be experiencing toxic stress may exhibit. Awesome, you all are coming in fast. So poor focus, their head is always down, blurting out, fatigue, difficulty with focus, fidgeting, maybe some defiance, anger, distraction, acting out, withdrawn, tantrums, absolutely. And so as you can see here, a lot of these different behaviors can even occur across the age continuum. So some of these may be seen in younger children, such as tantrums. Defiance may be seen in some of our older school age youth. Thank you all for that. So you just shared some of the behaviors that a child may exhibit if they are experiencing some type of toxic stress. And this graphic here actually is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And it has a list of different reactions or age-related reactions to stress and how educators, school personnel, and those who support children and youth can actually help those children facilitate those emotions, right? So each child you work with may exhibit various responses to stress. So of course, some of the stress responses that you've seen in your classrooms may not even be on here. So please feel free to share those in the chat as well. Preschool children may complain of bad dreams. They may return to school with difficulties using the bathroom when before they were completely potty trained. School-age children may exhibit some physical symptoms such as frequent headaches or forgetfulness about new information that you just taught in your classroom. Educators and school personnel can sort of help facilitate these emotions or help ease these different responses by creating some routines, setting gentle but firm limits, and allowing children to express themselves or express their emotions creatively through art, song, or drama. And this can be especially fun and creative virtually. For adolescents, reactions to stress may include some isolation from peers and loved ones, avoiding school or not completing assignments at all. Educators and school personnel can create safe spaces for youth to discuss concerns, of course, while not forcing it, and practice patience and tolerance, especially as students adapt to this new method of learning. So if you could share in the chat creative ways that you are building resilience within your classrooms with the children and youth that you serve. What are you doing to help them express themselves creatively or talk about some of the heavy emotions that they may be experiencing? And I'll repeat that. We would love to know. So Wendy said talking circles. So she allows her students and the youth that she served to sort of talk about what they're going through talking circles. Journaling and drawing, absolutely. School counselors have virtual lunches every Friday to discuss what's going on. That's awesome. I love to hear that. As counselors, we have talked to students in classes about coping skills. So absolutely teaching them some actual skills that they can use even when they're at home and they're away from the school. These are all great suggestions, and we will definitely add some of these to the list that we have here. Teaming up with local mental health professionals, absolutely. Making sure we validate their emotions and their feelings. There's nothing worse than someone telling you, oh, you'll get over it, or it's okay, don't worry about it. Absolutely, allowing them to express themselves and then validating that. Virtual calming centers, I would love to learn more about what that looks like. That sounds very interesting. And even some mindfulness. So these are great suggestions, and we definitely want to encourage you all to share these resources amongst yourselves. You are the professionals. You are the experts. You're in the classrooms with the youth and the children every day. So you understand what works and what doesn't work. So it's great to know that these are some of the methods that have worked for you. So where are children learning? We are going to invite Miss Erica Goldthorpe. She's the Senior Associate for ProSolutions Incorporated to come and talk to us about the various learning environments that children are learning in and then some safety considerations for these learning environments as well. So Erica, I'm going to go ahead and invite you in to speak to us about that.
Thank you, Naisha. Thank you so much. So I do want to take just a few minutes this morning to talk about where children are learning. So we know that some school districts in Georgia have opened in person, some with a hybrid approach, and then some are 100% virtual. And for this webinar, we want to focus on those virtual learning environments. We know that many children are learning virtually in their own home environment, but we also know that many children are not in their homes doing their virtual work. And for a variety of reasons, many families have had to find alternative places for their children to do their virtual work. And from that need, there are several different types of programs that have popped up, that have been created to meet the need of the community. And I, as a parent of, two virtual learners, certainly understand the need, for sometimes children, need to be in a different environment for them to be able to learn. So, of course, many children are in their own homes. We've also seen this new concept of the learning pod, where a small group of children that are usually similar in age will form a group that meets at a home. In these situations, typically there's an adult who is helping to facilitate the learning. This might be another parent. This might be a professional tutor, or it might even be a retired teacher. We're seeing lots of retired teachers sort of hired out of retirement to come help facilitate the learning pods. And these pods may stay in the same home. They might rotate throughout the week to different homes, or they may rotate every day depending on whose home is available. So there will definitely be varying degrees of organization within these types of groups or learning pods. You may have groups that are very highly organized with, same adult there every day, actively facilitating virtual learning, helping children get connected, helping make sure they're doing their work, they're following the platform that's organizing all of their classwork and helping them submit things and do their work. Or there may be other more fluid situations where the home that the child is in today is, just simply the place where they can come today to do their work, and it isn't quite as organized as some other groups, and there's just will be varying degrees of organization within these groups. So we also have licensed childcare facilities. As the need for full-time care for childcare for children in school-age children has become greater, the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, which is, we always say DECAL, has worked, and they continue to work with licensed childcare facilities to allow them to care for and then also assist school-age children with their virtual instruction. So right now we have a little over 60% of childcare programs in the state of Georgia that are open. And with those that are open, a lot of them are seeing low enrollment in many of their centers, so they have the space and they have the staff available to take school-age children and to help them with their virtual learning. These programs are also searchable at qualityrated.org. I will put this in the chat in just a little bit, so if you need that link, you can get the link. So at qualityrated.org, you can look at the various childcare programs across the state and see who is accepting school-age children. Thank you, Jill. And recently, DECAL has also received over $17 million from the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funding. And this is money that was set aside through the CARES Act to help provide financial assistance for families to pay for full-time care for children who are 5 to 12 and enrolled in virtual only learning. We know that this is very expensive, and this is not an option for many families to hire tutors or to find a facility to send their child. This can be a really expensive thing to do. And so this program was created to help pay for that so that families have a resource. So this is called the SOLVE program. And so we may be seeing more children who are moving into those childcare programs as they continue doing their virtual learning. This program is very new and is just getting up and running. So we should see more children moving into those settings, possibly in the future. And third, we have community organizations and businesses. And these range from churches, faith-based organizations. Some of them already had private preschools or after-school programs. And then we also see sports facilities, recreation departments. I've seen karate and ballet studios opening up virtual programs, and other businesses that may normally provide services or activities for children, but have never really provided adult, direct supervision or education services to children, but they are creating virtual assistance programs for school-age children. And finally, we know that some children are in school, or they are in school part-time in a hybrid model, so you may not be seeing them every day. And we also know, because this pandemic continues on and things continue changing, that districts may have to change their plans or alter their plans for school openings. And so we have some districts that maybe started in person, have gone to virtual, started virtual, going to in person. And those that are allowing parents to make a decision are also allowing parents to change that decision. So we may have students who are changing from a virtual to an in-person or back and forth learning style. So as you can see, and as I'm sure you know, already from the beginning of this school year, that children are learning in a variety of different settings, although we are in a virtual learning format. So definitely I would suggest, if you haven't already, to find out where children are learning. Ask parents where they're learning. I think it's good information to have just from an instructional perspective. But also, you know, if there are any indicators that we'll talk about later, any indicators that of abuse or maltreatment, that you have an understanding of where they're learning. We can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So of course, given these different types of learning environments, we absolutely must consider safety. First is supervision. We need to know who is supervising children. Is this a caregiver, like a parent or a neighbor, or is this a child care professional? Is this a community professional or an employee at a business that has created a virtual assistance program, providing supervision or tutoring or education services? Secondly, adult qualifications. Is this person over 18? And do they have the ability and the capacity to care for children and help manage the virtual learning? Next up is regulations and oversight. So certainly if a school-age child is in a licensed child care facility, licensed facilities have many rules and regulations that they're following to keep kids safe. It's a very highly regulated organization, regulated industry. And other community organizations and businesses may have substantially less oversight, less regulations that they're following related directly to supervision and care of school-age children. Obviously, children who are at home, they're at home with their families or an adult, and children in learning pods are with an adult, maybe volunteering, but more likely they're being paid to help with the learning. In these types of situations, especially if a family is hiring someone that they may not have known personally before they created their learning pod or their learning group, we certainly want them to do their diligence and check those references and credentials before bringing that person into the group. But a very important factor, and the reason that we're all here today, is mandated reporting. Individuals who work directly with children, either in a professional or a volunteer capacity, are mandated reporters. And I'm going to pull this straight from the Georgia Code. So according to Georgia Code, the category of child service organization personnel means persons employed by or volunteering at a business or an organization, whether public, private, for-profit, not-for-profit, voluntary, that provides care, treatment, education, training, supervision, coaching, counseling, recreation programs, or shelter to children. These individuals are mandated reporters. So by providing care and education services to children in these various types of virtual learning environments, these individuals are mandated reporters. And it's really important that they understand that and that they also know how to recognize and report suspected abuse or neglect. So we want them to receive mandated reporter training as well so that they know what to look for and how to identify potential maltreatment. So next up, we have experience with school-age children. It's really important for anyone caring for children, obviously, to have experience and knowledge of school-age children. And this really flows right into the last point, that virtual learning can be stressful. Like I said, I have 2 virtual learners. I have a kindergartner and a 3rd grader. So yes, I can attest that it is stressful, but I know that I do not need to say that to school personnel on this webinar, because I know you guys know it can be stressful. And I also know that you all are working around the clock to support virtual learning for your students. So in general, you know, virtual learning can be stressful. It's new technology, it's a new format, it's something that we've never done before. In many situations, it's totally different than what we experienced in the spring. We suddenly had to go to a virtual learning format, especially for families who may have a lack of resources, those who have a lack of devices or internet, or those who just don't feel like they can adequately help their child with virtual learning. This can be a major stressor, excuse me. And it's also stressful for anyone working in a community program or managing a learning pod or group if they're not comfortable with the technology, they're not comfortable managing multiple children's different schedules. I know my children are on alternating Zoom schedules right now, so keeping track of that you know, has been a juggle, but I think we finally got it figured out. So it can be very stressful if that person doesn't really understand, you know, kind of what they're getting into and how have correct expectations for how everything works in a virtual format. And Naisha just talked about anxiety and stress and how this crisis has really affected many families, and we know that the risk of child abuse and neglect is much higher when we are in these unstable times. So certainly any adult who is managing virtual learning needs to be able to maintain a safe and a calm learning environment for those children as they're learning virtually. So again, it's really important to know where the children are learning and to have an understanding of these different safety considerations for the various virtual learning environments. And it's all still new, so we may see other types of environments popping up as we continue with virtual learning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erica, for sharing more information. I think it's very interesting to learn the various environments that youth and children are learning in, and to not only that, but consider how there could be some safety risks there. So thank you for sharing all of that information. Again, these slides will be available to you all. We've seen the questions in the chat, so we will make sure that the slides are available and linked, but we appreciate you all for asking those questions. So now you may be wondering, what can we do as professionals? What can we do as school personnel when it comes to maintaining safety, recognizing children and families that may need some additional support? That was one of the questions we received through registration. And then equipping school personnel and others, such as parents and those who are maybe facilitating learning pods. How are we equipping them with the tools that they need to ensure the safety of the children that they're working with? So what we'll discuss first is maintaining safety and really remaining vigilant for signs of abuse and neglect and creating those predictable schedules whenever possible. So it's important to remember that while our learning environments may look different from what we're accustomed to, our roles as mandated reporters have not changed. And Erica did mention that earlier during her part of the presentation. And so we still need to remain vigilant for signs of abuse and neglect. And that can be difficult sometimes because we're not always familiar with the home environment, and technology can, of course, obscure any attempts to recognize abuse and neglect. So some of the things we want you all to keep in mind and consider as you're working with students virtually is the child missing scheduled Zoom meetings or office hours? And is this happening often? Are you unable to connect with the child or their family via phone or email? Have you heard or seen anything concerning on the videos, such as screaming, unsanitary housing conditions, young children alone or being cared for by other children? And does your student appear tired, sad, nervous, disruptive, angry, etc. in Zoom? And you all mentioned some of those sort of reactions or reactions to stress in the chat a little bit earlier. It's super important to also look out for some physical signs of abuse that you can recognize, such as blackened eyes, patterned facial injuries, possibly from a hand or a slap, injuries to the neck and ear, and then aware of just some yelling in the background. Another critical thing to note is just, are the youth or the children showing up on camera for some of those Zoom meetings or Google meetings that you're hosting? And if not, have a sort of some different attempts to get in touch with the child or the family been answered? So if there are some concerns with that, we of course suggest that all school personnel and sort of educators reach out to individuals that are designated mandated reporters within their school systems if they have additional questions. But of course, if you have any suspicions that any type of abuse or neglect is occurring, we encourage you to make that report by, of course, following any protocols or guidelines provided by the school system. Lastly, we ask that you listen out for some of those concerning statements that you may hear during learning circles or times when you may have some drawing activities. If there are ever concerning statements such as mom is really drinking a lot and she forgot to feed the baby last night, or dad is yelling all the time and it's scary how he hit my brother today, those are definitely things of concern that we want to, of course, report if we have additional concerns. But we certainly want to listen out for those things because children have a way of revealing when they're experiencing any type of abuse or neglect. Sometimes it can be directly, sometimes it will be indirectly, and sometimes they will use sort of strings attached to disclose abuse and neglect as well by telling you, well, I'll only tell you if you promise not to tell someone else, or I can't tell you if you tell my mom, or things like that. So we certainly want to be aware of the different ways that children may disclose abuse. And we'll talk about how you can learn about those various ways if you haven't learned about them already. So the intake questions that DFACS will ask upon making a report have changed. And what I personally want to say is that there are various ways to report, either by phone or electronically. But if you do need to make a report, we of course always encourage you all to call the 1-855-GA-CHILD number or 1-855-422-4453. And so if you need to make a report immediately, of course, we always encourage you to call that number and keep it handy. It's not all, of course, you can remember the 1-855-GA-CHILD, but it's always great to keep it handy. We also encourage you to keep a list of these questions handy as well. As I mentioned earlier, we will provide these slides to you all, but these are the new, fresh off the press questions that an intake caseworker will ask if you call to make a report. So some of those questions include, is anyone in the home active in the military? And if you have that information, what military are they based or located in? Is anyone in the home a member of a Native American or Indian tribe? To your knowledge, has anyone in the home been recently ill? Of course, that's a very important question as we're living in the time of COVID-19. Who is the primary caretaker? Who is the victim or the child that you're concerned with? So these are very detailed and nuanced questions. However, you do not need to know all of this information to make a report to DFACS. And we want to encourage you all, if you don't know the answers to these questions, to move forward with the report anyway. It's just best to know as much as you can, because this helps with the DFACS process or the case investigation. Some additional questions that you may receive, or a DFACS caseworker may ask, is the victim or the child in foster care, or tell how the maltreater has abused the child. So really being able to detail what happened to the child or what were the circumstances around the abuse or the neglect. when did this last occur? Is this something that's been ongoing? Is the child currently in danger? Of course, we call that present danger, and we typically encourage you, if the child is presently in danger, to call 911 because they are designed to respond faster, and then of course call DFACS to make a report. Does the maltreater have access to the child now, and where are the children? Being able to provide an exact location at the time of making that report. Again, you do not need all of this information to make that report. We just encourage you to, if you do have the information, to share that with the intake worker. And we always like to mention this, we mention this in our mandated reporter trainings. It is not your job to investigate. If you have suspicions that there is some type of abuse or neglect occurring, all you need is reasonable suspicion to move forward with that report. So now we're going to talk about recognizing children and families who may need some support. So some considerations to keep in mind are, is the family struggling more than usual or for the first time? And this may be a little difficult to recognize in a virtual situation, but sometimes you can get some clues through your screen time with the child. Maybe there's some increased frustration that the child is exhibiting. Maybe the child even shared this, as you have some of the sharing opportunities throughout the day or throughout the week with that child or youth. And of course, we do understand that schools are equipped with some resource officers, with guidance counselors, individuals who are very familiar with resources in and around the area. So if there are ever concerns with resources, maybe the child needs a referral to sort of some resourcing, there's a concern with the family as far as housing or food, there are some schools that are equipped to provide those resources right away. But there are also some community organizations within your area that, if you don't have the internal resources, you can connect them with an external community organization. Our goal is never to put more on teachers and school personnel than they already have on their plate. So we certainly encourage you to at least familiarize yourself with one or two organizations that are experts in resourcing families, and just have those resources in mind anytime you ever have concerns about a family who may need some further assistance. And we'll talk about a few different resources that are available in certain areas of the state, and then some statewide resources as well. So resources for families. Some supporting families may physically require them or require you linking them to resources, or even virtually sending an email or having a phone conversation. And Kayla just asked, will these new questions be added to the online reporting portal form? And what I'll do is allow one of our experts, either Miss Melanie Lawrence or Miss Jacqueline, to answer that question for us. And if you all would like to unmute yourselves, or we can address it during the panel discussion, but we definitely want to be able to answer her question either out loud or in the chat box. That's a great question, Kayla. Thank you.
Yes, I'll chime in. This is Jacqueline. The questions are being updated on the mandated reporter website as we speak. So give us a couple of weeks. Hopefully it will take that long.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacqueline. Again, thank you for that question, Kayla. So some emergency utility and rental assistance. So United Way 211 is offering emergency utility and rental assistance to families in need. This program, however, is only offered to City of Atlanta residents. So we'll go ahead and put the link to that program in the chat. However, what I will say is there is a documentation process involved in this. So of course, if you refer any families to that, just of course, maybe keep in mind that there is some documentation that will be involved. They will have to have certain documents to be able to access these services, but it is an excellent program that's available to families within the City of Atlanta. Now, of course, we understand that the state of Georgia is much bigger than the City of Atlanta. So I'm sure many of you are wondering what's available for our families in these surrounding areas. And so if you have questions about resources in surrounding areas, we encourage you to call the 1-800-CHILDREN number, and it's 1-800-244-5373. And this is a statewide resource and referral helpline that is free and available to parents, caregivers, and professionals that work with children. So anytime someone has a question or needs a resource in and around their area, they can call that number and speak to a trained professional who can help direct them to particular resources in their area. You can also visit our website at pcageorgiahelpline.org, and you can actually find geocoded resources on our interactive map, and you'll be able to sort of navigate those resources yourself for a family. You can download a list of resources to Excel as well. Some additional resources for families that Erica mentioned in her portion of the presentation: full-time care for school-aged children. So as she stated earlier, that Quality Rated, or DCAL, has their quality rated search engine, which allows parents to look for childcare within their area. And so they've added this new feature here, which also allows parents to look for full-time care for school-aged children. So just wanted to reiterate the importance of that program, and thank you, Erica, so much for sharing that. And all of these links will be linked in the presentation, so don't worry if you weren't able to write or jot something down. Additionally, another resource that is also available to residents of certain areas is the Tutor ATL, and it's an organization that provides free personalized online tutoring to children and youth in Metro Atlanta. So we know that a lot of parents are calling our helpline, the 1-800-CHILDREN helpline, trying to either find somewhere for their child to stay during the day or find resources for tutors during the afternoon and evening time. And so this is a great resource for those who live in the Atlanta public school systems, Cobb County, Fulton County, or Marietta City schools, or have children that go to those schools. And so they provide services to K through 12 students, and they just use their public library access card, or they have some different access mediums that you can use to access Tutor ATL. So we, of course, encourage you all to use that resource and refer your families to that resource as well if they live in those areas. We are always looking for additional areas in the rest of the state. So what we encourage you all to do now is, if you're familiar with any statewide resources that may be of assistance to families, please drop those in the chat. And what we'll do is we'll download those and try to create a composite list. So if you know of any resources, especially in some of our rural areas that are servicing children and families, please go ahead and drop those in the chat, because this is a learning experience for us all. So we can certainly benefit from knowing about what's going on in your communities, whether they're temporary or sort of ongoing. So I'll give us a couple of seconds to drop those in the chat if you have any.
Yeah, and we'll put those all on the website along with the recording and the slides right afterwards, but if not by tomorrow, and we'll email you out that link. So we want to share all the resources that you're giving with us right now for other teachers and educators and community workers.
Absolutely. And there was one additional resource that was mentioned, and I'll have Jill drop that one in the chat as well, but the Georgia Legal Aid is actually assisting with evictions. So if you call the Georgia Legal Aid number, they will actually assist families, provide some legal assistance and referrals for families that may be facing evictions. All right, so lastly, we'll just briefly cover how we can equip school personnel and parents with educational materials. So we talked a lot about how there are different learning environments that our children and youth are learning in, and how oftentimes those professionals may not have received mandated reporter training. But as Erica said earlier, it is critical that anyone who works with children, whether in a professional or volunteer capacity, receives some type of mandated reporter training. And there are so many different resources. ProSolutions Incorporated, or ProSolutions, they offer free online training. We've actually collaborated with them to offer a hybrid model. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So of course, we encourage mandated reporting for adults. So we have developed or adapted some mandated reporting one-pagers from Missouri, PCA Missouri. And so these one-pagers talk about how adults are responsible for identifying abuse, and how adults that work in non-traditional areas, whether they're a bus driver or they don't typically work one-on-one with children in a professional capacity, such as school personnel or educator, but they still work with children, how they can also be mandated reporters. I know a lot of school systems are excellent, and they provide mandated reporter training for anyone, whether it's someone who drives the bus, some of the cafeteria workers, janitorial service workers. Everyone receives that training. And so we certainly encourage that if there isn't the capacity to have someone trained, to at least give them resources such as the one-pagers listed here. And these are available on our website. Jill just linked it in the chat for us. Additionally, we have a one-pager for educators, and this is a great resource that we actually adapted for the presentation today. And it talks a little bit more about the crisis and how it's impacting our students, and what you can continue to do as educators to support students, and then of course support yourself, because this is just as stressful for you as it is for children and families. Again, we mentioned free mandated reporter training. ProSolutions offers free training. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, the Stephanie B. Blank Center, offers a mandated reporter training as well. And then we offer a hybrid model where you will take the online training with ProSolutions first, so that free online training, and then we follow up with you to just have a virtual sort of discussion around any questions that you have and even discuss some scenarios. So that's an option that's available to you. You can visit our website at pcageorgia.org to learn more about that. Also, of course, our friends at the Georgia Center for Child Advocacy, they lead the Stewards of Children Darkness to Light initiative on child sexual abuse prevention. And so, of course, if you ever need any resources around child sexual abuse prevention, we can also link you with the Georgia Center for Child Advocacy. We encourage everyone who has any type of interactions with children to also take that Stewards of Children child sexual abuse prevention training. Right now, it's actually still free online, using a particular code. Allie Raisman, one of the Olympic gymnasts, partnered with Steward or Darkness to Light to offer this training. So that's another option for you. We certainly encourage you to access that training. They also offer some training resources for parents. So helping parents talk about sexual abuse with their children, which can of course be very scary. They offer some additional resources around how to identify apps and how predators are using apps to target children. So this is a great resource for all parents and families. All right, so I have talked enough. Now it's time for you all to interact with our panel. So I'm going to hand it over to Jill Walsh, who is serving as our moderator today.
Everyone, if I can have the panelists turn on their videos so we can see them as they kind of answer a couple questions for us. So first thing is we're going to kind of have them all introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they do, and then I also want them to answer how their organization or sector has been impacted by the pandemic. And then how are they also responding in regards to families that they serve? So I'm going to start with Erica.
Thanks, Jill. I'm Erica Goldthorpe. I am the Senior Manager for Instructional Design with ProSolutions Training, and also Senior Associate on the Care Solutions side. Care Solutions is the parent company of ProSolutions Training. And so I've managed our online trainings for the last 10 years or so, and we're partnered with lots of different organizations to help bring this training to those who need it for free. And so being in the online training business, we have been extremely busy during the pandemic as everything has needed to go to an online format. So we've been helping lots of organizations get their trainings online. But in addition to offering the mandated reporter training, we offer nearly 200 other trainings on child development, which we feel is really important for adults to understand normal, typical child development. And, you know, those things are really important. So you have expectations of how children can behave, should behave, and what they're doing. So happy to answer any questions, childcare related, learning situation related.
Awesome. And now I'm going to go to Julia Neighbors from PCA. If you want to just tell us kind of what you do and then how your organization is responding to the pandemic.
Sure, thank you, Jill. Good morning, everybody. As Jill mentioned, my name is Julia Neighbors. I'm the Director of Prevent Child Abuse Georgia. We're glad to have you here. I would say that what we've been doing these last 6 months is exactly what you're experiencing now. Our business, a lot of our business is training and technical assistance, and we've had to transition or pivot into the new virtual reality. And so really, we have addressed that by looking at all of our trainings that we can provide in this new format. And we also serve as a resource for professionals that work with families, for parents and caregivers. And so really trying to identify resources that our stakeholders and partners and their constituents needs. And so really trying to identify those, aggregate those, get them out there as soon as we become aware of that. So we have a pretty robust website, social media, Facebook page, and we also have a monthly newsletter that we update with resources. And so that is our way of trying to maintain support to you all. And so we will continue to offer webinars on timely topics around mandated reporting and child well-being. So that's where we've landed in these last several months.
Can I have Lawrence Nelson, please?
Sure. Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Lawrence Nelson. I'm the Director of Training and Professional Development for DFACS. Let's see, how has the pandemic affected us? I think about the same as it has everyone else. We are all, for the most part, doing our work virtually. However, that does not change our obligation to respond to reports of abuse and neglect. In terms of how we are responding to those that we serve from a customer perspective, for those on the OFI side, for the OFI, those who need food stamps. And of course, as we talk about prevention, that side of the house is a big part of the work that we do to help prevent child abuse and neglect. Folks don't have to come to the office. They can actually apply for all their benefits online. They can do their interviews. We've been doing that, I think, relatively successfully since we've gone through the pandemic. And then, of course, as far as on the child welfare side, staff are still responding to reports of abuse and neglect. We're still doing visits. We're still doing some visits face-to-face, and we're also doing some visits virtually. We are utilizing technology in situations where there isn't I guess you can say, a high safety concern. Where we are utilizing WhatsApp, where families are able to basically give us walkthroughs of their home, and we're doing virtual visits with children. And so that's very new to us on the child welfare side. But for the most part, our work continues as everyone else's work is.
I'm going to go through the whole DFACS crew, the cluster right now. So can I have Jacqueline Clyde?
Yes, my name is Jacqueline Clyde. I am the lead field programming specialist, project manager for the CPS Intake Communication Center. That's the part of DFACS where all the child welfare, child abuse and neglect cases come through. I am typically the person that helps interpret our policy and practice for our agency. As far as the pandemic is concerned, our numbers have decreased when we first went into the quarantine version of it. But everything seemed to have stabilized during the summer. So my job really didn't change any during the pandemic. It's just that the rate of the work changed. That's all for me.
Awesome. Can I have Melanie Carlo?
Good morning, I'm Lee Carlo. I'm a policy project administrator with Department of Family and Children's Services. From the policy perspective at DFACS, there's not much that has changed with the pandemic for us. We continue to update our DFACS internal policy as needed based on federal and state laws, and try to assist our field staff to make sure that they are applying it correctly.
Awesome. And of course, Cheryl Benefield with DOE.
Good morning again. Cheryl Benefield, I'm the Mental Health and Wellbeing Coordinator for the Department of Education, and my position sits in the Office of the Whole Child. So we are really working on focusing on all of the non-academic barriers to learning that are experienced not just during COVID, but during other times as well. Of course, at the department, there's been a response to all of the things around educating students in a pandemic environment, whether it's virtual, hybrid, or face-to-face. So we have different departments that are working on different issues. All of the academics are over in curriculum and instruction, virtual and technology related issues, of course, sit in IT and in the virtual learning section. But in our office, we really are focusing on all of those non-academic things. So we really spend a lot of time reaching out and working with our partners. And this has been a really supportive group. We get a number of questions from educators in our unit, and most of those questions get fielded over to us around things like child abuse in this particular time and child protection in this time, as well as, of course, family support. So how do we support our families? How do we protect our children? And how do we create we're not creating the resources, but we're creating, different districts want to create resource pools and resource documents of their own, because everywhere in the state is so very different. So we try to support and connect people to the agencies and the groups in their areas that are doing different kinds of work. Again, we work around the non-academic things, but if we do get academic questions or virtual learning type questions, we of course get those over to the people at the department who are best positioned to answer them. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what we've done at this time, is really pivoted to supporting schools as they respond to this unprecedented time.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to ask just a couple more questions. So feel free, any panelists who kind of know what's going on, to jump in there and respond. And as I ask these, if anyone in the audience has questions, you can put them in the chat box or in the Q&A right now as well. So we know that the pandemic has caused a lot of additional demands that are placed on educators and school personnel. And a lot of these demands are really critical to the safety of the children. So this has led to an increased kind of anxiety among school professionals, other educators. So what do you guys recommend for educators and school personnel kind of facing the challenges around virtual providing safety for the children? Any additional tips?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
Oh, I was just going to say, as an educator myself, I think this is one of the most critical times in education that I've experienced in my career. The most critical time for us to reach out to each other. So I think educators who are actually doing the work, the more that they can support each other and reach out and find out how, if they're having a struggle, how is someone else who is in the same kind of position, how are they coping and what are they doing? I had one person tell me recently that one of the ways that their administration has supported their staff has been through Jeans passes or leave early. And if you're in education, you know that's, hey, we're about that. But if you're teaching virtually, that doesn't really, So how are we communicating and how are we talking about how to support our staff in these unprecedented times so that they're best positioned and in their best space to support students?
No, I love that kind of peer support. I know a lot of my teacher friends have said they feel broken now more than ever, but are more needed now more than ever. I think Lawrence had something too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the biggest things that occurred for us in the human services field, whether you're a teacher or a social worker, is that lack of personal engagement is something that we miss in terms of having that personal connection. And so I think we have to be very purposeful in doing things to create that personal connection with one another. And I think for teachers, it's also important for them as much as they can is to make sure that they try to create opportunities to have that personal connection with their students. I know there's a lot of anxiety around their learning and then also just thinking about wanting to assess safety. And so I think just creating that opportunity for that personal connection, which may even include having more frequent one-on-one time with your students and or their parents will give a lot, because I think there's a lot of assumptions sometimes that happens. My kids are learning virtually and this is our third week, and my son has missed 2 of his small group reading sessions in terms of his time, because they've had the classroom time and they have small group time, and it's because of creating that balance. And so for me, on one end, I'm like, oh my God, my son's missing these sessions. I'm like, what is his teacher thinking, right? And I don't want there to be any assumptions. And so I reached out. I said, I need to make some adjustments to my schedule, and in terms of how I monitor his work. And I think as educators, as much as you guys can, and I know you guys are being patient, establish that personal connection with the students and the parents. And then that way, I think that gives you a better sense of knowing when things may be going wrong or not be going wrong. And I think that also helps to establish that personal connection. So I would just offer that as some tips as well.
Thank you. I love the many hats that we all wear and bring to the table here. So the next question is, how can nonprofits or different community organizations, so we know that many people listening are teachers, but they also wear different hats as faith-based leaders, as supporting in other ways. So how can those people best support DFACS in school systems during this time, especially if they're involved in other organizations?
I'll jump in. I'll just reiterate. I think it's what we have found, and I probably should have said this earlier on, is the sharing of resources. I mean, really, I think we're very fortunate that we have really strong partnerships and have had really strong partnerships with pretty much all of the organizations that are represented here today on this webinar. And this, trying to find ways to support teachers, educators, and really other child serving professionals, I think has strengthened our collaborative relationship. I would say that this has been extended to other groups. And so our ability to connect, to use some of what Lawrence had talked about, because the connection piece and being able to pick up the phone, or we actually don't even pick up the phone anymore. We send quick emails to each other so that we can get answers, because we're getting questions on a regular basis about different scenarios, and we don't have all the answers. And I know Naisha said that earlier. We don't necessarily have all the answers, but if you ask the question, every one of us that's represented on this panel is determined to find an answer or a resource. And we might not know it, but we can reach out. And so I think this has been really helpful. Well, we hope it's helpful for you all that are out there in the field, because we are removed from it. So there's also that communication of knowing what's of concern, what do we need to be aware of, so that we can provide some additional insight and resources to you all. And I'm not sure if anyone wants to add on to that, but that's how I've seen nonprofits and government and this whole private-public partnership come together in these most recent months.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of nonprofits doing a lot of surveying of parents and asking them what they need so that they can be responsive and be listening to the needs, because they're all different. Georgia's very diverse in its needs, where we are. So you guys are often the best people to kind of hear and tell us what to be doing too. Okay, what is the status of abuse and neglect reports being made to DFACS? Should we be concerned with low number of reports? So I think you guys covered this really briefly, but if you can give us one more time on that.
Well, to add to that, I look back at some of the numbers, and from July of last year compared to July of this year, we actually had more reports this year in July than we did in July of last year. July being one of our lowest months of reports because it is a summer month. But I went and looked at the numbers for August of last year compared to August of this year. We're only about 1,500 reports off this year than we were last year, but that's can be I think because some of the schools are not back in session, and August being one of the months that the first month that most schools in Georgia go back full time, that could be at part of that issue. So we won't know until the end of September how much of an impact school being out or school being virtual is actually having on our reporting, because the schools are our number one reporting entity when school is in session. We won't know the full impact of that, but I think everything may have stabilized a little bit because some of the kids are getting out in the communities, and they're being seen by more people than they were at the beginning of this quarantine thing. Hopefully we won't have to go back into quarantine, so we won't have to worry about that. But I think everything's going to stabilize as far as the numbers. So I won't say that we're going to continue to have low numbers moving forward.
Awesome. So it seems like people have kind of adjusted a little bit, and now we're starting to pick up reporting versus.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we got this in the Q&A box. That's a little bit of a scenario one. The person said that this training is right on time. A teacher emailed me yesterday and said a parent was yelling and cursing at a child during a virtual session. The class could hear it, so she muted everyone, but was concerned about the child. She is on the fence about calling DFACS at this point. Does she call the family? What does she say? Usually she would talk to the child in person and build a relationship that way. So how does she navigate this virtually? She's a school counselor. So thank you for posting that in the questions.
I would suggest talking to the child and the parent. But I would do it from a I would do it at just a, how's virtual learning going for you? And is there anything that, that we can do to help to support? Yelling and cursing parents, I mean, that happens all the time, right? But is the concern elevated to a point of this is child abuse or neglect? And so the only way to maybe get a better understanding of that is really understand what stressors maybe the family may be feeling. And so, that parent could be working 10 feet away from the child, and there could be some interruption between the child during school and the parent trying to do their job. And there just maybe some stress in that. And what the teacher may be hearing could be a response to that. And so I would go from an inquiry perspective of how is virtual learning going and what can provide support. And I would just say, let that guide you in terms of what you feel the next steps are. As a counselor, or even I would even suggest as a teacher, have some one-on-one time with the student. How are things going with you in your virtual learning? Do you have a private space to work? Is there anything that you need, some extra time? And I think during some of that conversation, I think that can help to maybe fill in some answers for you. Maybe offer some things that you may want to speak to the parent about. That would just kind of be my initial thought. I don't know if some others may want to chime in with some other thoughts they may have.
Yeah,
I would strongly recommend that school districts and schools be prepared for those kinds of, and this is switching over from the child protection, child welfare side to the school administrator kind of side, but be prepared that unforeseen things may happen in the background or ancillary to the instruction that's going on that may expose other children in the class to things that may be of concern. So be prepared for how not only you'll respond to that family, but how you'll respond to the families of the other students in the classroom, virtual classroom, who also heard whatever was being said and done, because that can not only raise concerns about hearing language, but it could raise concerns among the children about that parental-child interaction if that's not their norm. So I think schools and districts really need to be prepared for how they're going to respond in a broader sense if there's anything out of the typical teacher-child interaction that's happening in a virtual classroom.
And I will also add that in this this time of technology and virtual learning, that we use this opportunity as an advantage rather than a disadvantage. Take the opportunity to build rapport with the families, get to know the kids a little bit better, kids that you normally, or parents that you normally don't interact with because they're working during the day and you only see them maybe once every 9 weeks. It may be an opportunity to actually build a better rapport with that family. And then that way you can see a change in a child if things starts to happen where there may be some concerns that may need to be addressed.
Great, thank you. So we have 2 more questions in there. So how can I help teachers identify children who are in need of mental health support while instructing through a virtual setting, especially knowing that some of this kind of unrest going on, there's so much going on in the world, and how much of it is the pandemic, which still warrants mental health, and some of it is more in need of additional services.
Well, I think that if there were services in place in the school prior to school closure, I would expect that the school and the district is working with those providers to determine how they're going to continue those services in a virtual setting. If there's not mental health services available in that school or in that district, then certainly if that school or district would reach out to us, we can connect them to our partners at the Department of Behavioral Health, and they can help them determine where providers are. We know that a lot of providers have pivoted to telehealth and telemental health services. So there's a lot more opportunity for services to be delivered that way than there was prior to the pandemic. So determining what the continuation spectrum looks like based on what was available prior to school closures and when students were in school for face-to-face instruction, and then reaching out if you feel like you have students who are in need so that we can try to help make those connections for you.
Awesome. Is there any additional training on identifying children who might be in need? I know we touched on some things about like identifying abuse and neglect virtually, but in terms of mental health, I know there's a lot of things, but is there anything geared specifically to virtual yet?
Not that I'm aware of. There's, again, if a student suspects that, if a staff member suspects that a student has mental health needs, then working with their local provider to determine what that virtual assessment might look like or how they're doing assessment in a virtual construct, that would be the biggest way to address that. There's no training right now for educators to identify potential mental health issues. I would say that you would handle that typically as we would if you were face to face. If you see something of concern, absolutely take that to your school administrator or your school counselor, however you have it set up for the virtual environment, much as you would any other concern that you have about a student, and then work with the protocols or the practices in your system.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question for the DFACS panelist. Is there or will there be a work group to establish from protocol for virtual services being provided for children in foster care, especially since we do not know how long the pandemic will continue? It has required creativity for me that I would be glad to share, and I'm sure others have ideas as well, but she just wanted to kind of throw that out there to see what is being done for foster children.
You know, it may be something in the future. I'm not aware of any current groups that are going on, but we are continuing to adjust to the virtual environment. Like Lawrence talked about, doing virtual visits with children. So things like that we'll continue to work on in the future, especially if this continues longer than we all anticipated.
I think it already has.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So I see, in also regards to the youth mental health, so someone put youth mental health first aid will be offered virtually, and that's a wonderful program. So I know there's a couple places that offer that for free or sometimes at low charge if you want to Google in Georgia, and I'll try and put a link on our website with the slides for that as well, because I know Georgia State has a couple places that offer that. Okay, so last question, because I know we get these a lot about supervision. So I'm getting a lot of referrals for students under age 12 being used as a babysitter and teacher for younger children. How are you guys handling these referrals, or even how are we handling it in generally?
I'll start on that one. So the important thing to remember with all of our supervision concerns is that DFACS has guidance around the age of supervision. You know, children don't wake up on their 13th birthday mature vastly different than the day before. So when we're assessing how old children can be when they're left home alone or when they're serving as a babysitter, age is just going to be one component that we're looking at. We're going to be looking at their maturity level. We're going to be looking at, you know, are they comfortable in that situation? Do they have an emergency plan in place? Are there neighbors or other people that they are aware of to call or can reach out for help? In general, DFACS guidance is children under 8 years and under should not be left unsupervised. 9 to 12, in that range, again, based on maturity, special needs, all these kinds of things, 9 to 12 can be left for brief periods of time, but we don't recommend that age group serve as babysitters. And then 13 and older, that age range would potentially be able to serve as babysitters and be unsupervised for longer periods of time. So if you're talking about a 12-year-old supervising, you know, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered about that 12-year-old. For one, they should also be in school themselves. So that's going to also be a concern, how they're fulfilling their own educational needs if they are supervising younger children. So every situation is unique, but those are some factors to consider with supervision.
Yeah, I know this situation has created a lot of unideal situations that are unfortunately there's no magic wand for them of here's what you do, especially in supervision when parents have to go to work. So also in that case, looking at DCAL's website for the SOLVE scholarships for children who are school age who can get supervision while the digital learning. So that might be one thing that families can qualify for. So looking for those resources. Sometimes it's not always a defects thing, it's resource as well. Erica, do you have something?
Well, I was just going to, in this situation, kind of reiterate what Lawrence mentioned when we were talking about the cursing and, you know, the background noise. I think this is also a situation where you can contact the parents and the family and just say, hey, how's this going? You know, to see if you can point them in the direction of some resources and say, you know, DCAL does have a program to help children, school-age children, you know, have a place that they can go with adults that can help them with their learning. So, you know, I think it's another opportunity to connect with the family and see if you can go about pointing them towards a resource in that way that is not passing judgment on the situation that they're in, or, you know, making assumptions about, you know, why a 12-year-old is helping with schools. So I think you can do that in a very non-threatening way to make that connection with the family.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone. We are at time. I am putting in the evaluation link into the chat box right now, and we'll also be emailing that out to everyone so they can get a certificate of attendance. There's no CEUs, but you will also get a link to the website where we'll have the recording, a lot of the additional resources we talked about in the slides. I see just one or two extra questions in there, so we'll probably answer those and put them on our website just to be considerate of everyone's time. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Anything else, Nisha?
That's it. We just would like to thank each of the organizations represented today. Thank you so much for your time. I know we've been bothering you and emailing you back and forth, but we appreciate every organization represented today. And we just wanted to show our appreciation for your time today. And thank you, each of you who showed up even for the webinar. Thank you for the questions. They have been excellent, and we will continue having these conversations. So if you have topics that you're interested in, please let us know and we'll be sure to address them how we see fit. Thank you all.
And I'm putting our contact into the email right now for any other questions or disinformation. Just while we have a couple of you on here, I don't know, people can go ahead and take the evaluation and leave, but there's one more question that I just wanted to ask you guys since you're still on the line that we can post for people later. And that was that they're seeing this year that parents are not registering students for school. So they're not attending virtually or in person after contacting guardians and offering support to help them get their child registered. They're not following through. I've made reports for educational neglect, but they're being screened out. Any suggestions? I know we had a couple panelists leave, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
I know, I wish Cheryl was on. Well, there's a compulsory school law, so you have to be enrolled in school until the age of 15, 16, is it 16? So,
It's 16.
16. So I think my understanding is you're either enrolled in school or if they're doing homeschool, there has to be some record that they're in a homeschool environment. And then beyond that, then I think that's when the law kind of kicks in, but I'm not sure. I'm not familiar enough about what actually happens when parents don't enroll in school or in homeschool. So I think that's something we can look at. Although Cheryl may know more, and maybe some of our defects folks, you might run into this, I imagine.
Yes. We have a law that requires the children to attend school or be homeschooled, but it depends on what the situation is as to how we respond to the report, and whether we're going to decide if it's educational neglect or rather than a child just not attending school at that time. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and I would not know what particular situation was going on with the situations that she reported as the reason why it may have been screened out. It would depend. You're right. It's like once a child is enrolled in school, they have to continue even before the age of 6. But the state of Georgia requires that all children over the age of 6 have to be attend school until the age of 16.
And I'm just seeing here comments in the chat box for those that are still hanging out with us. So there is, yeah, the intent to homeschool document that has to be filed with DOE. And then in DeKalb, it looks like they're not taking attendance related referrals at this time, which has become a barrier, which, yeah, I mean, I'm just reading the comment. I don't have a response.
So the intent to homeschool declaration, the House bill that was passed last year, they have 45 days. And then at that point, when DFACS gets the referral, after it's been 45 days, that's when the intervention would come. But that is separate than educational neglect. It's a separate.
So does that mean y'all are expecting, so either you're gonna
yeah, it hasn't been
declaration. So now the
Yes.
school is starting, so you are so that means you all will be expecting a bump up in referrals, I guess, in mid-September on this
Yes.
issue.
We are looking at expecting that, and we've been talking about the fact that if kids are not turning their cameras on, or if they're not checking in, at what point do we say that we need to be involved? So it's been a discussion that we've been having, because we know that those kind of things are going to happen. Like I said, I don't know her particular situation, and I don't know what day their school actually started, because when we're looking at educational neglect, not enrolling a child in school, we have to look at the school district's start date. How many days from the start date until you call us? Because if it's been 2 days, well, that's not a DFACS referral, because we can't determine educational neglect in 2 days. So it would depend on when that school year started.
I took some notes on that to post. We'll probably send it to Cheryl as well to see if they have any overarching kind of protocols. Anything?
Thank you all so much. The chat and the Q&A have been showing just positive responses to all the information you all shared. So thank you for your expertise and your time. We really do appreciate it. We couldn't do it without you, just so you know.
So look for the follow-up webinar.
Right. I think at this point we're like a ad hoc committee now. Like this is a thing.
I love the multidisciplinary. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Are you shutting us down?
Yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and shut down. I don't think we have too many more questions coming in.